We're going to be in Luke 15 again. Go ahead and open your Bibles to Luke 15. I'm going to continue this conversation on the parable of the prodigal son. And look some more at the heart of the Father, the heart of God, and how we can so easily miss the heart of God. But thankfully, He is committed to revealing Himself to us. And what I want to talk about this morning, last week we zeroed in on a certain part of the parable where the prodigal son, it says of him that nobody was giving anything to him when he found himself in the pigsty there. And this morning we're going to zero in a little bit more on the older brother, okay, and make some observations about the older brother. And as usual, you're going to help me with that. And so in a few minutes we're going to read the text, and when I read, I want you to pay careful attention, and we're going to make some observations about the older brother. But before we do, let me just say, to get our gears going, that get our gears going, excuse the pun, yeah. We're trying to get that gear going, this gear going. So our understanding of God's heart, we've been saying, is super important, okay? How we understand God's heart, God's character, His disposition toward us is so important. And one of the things that I appreciate about this parable is how it helps us see that even a religious mindset, or I should say a religious culture, can distort or obscure the heart of God. Okay, and so I want to help us to think about that this morning from this parable. I've got my book, Unchristian. You guys have heard of the Barna group, right? They're responsible for a lot of gathering of statistics and sharing of statistics, especially within the realm of Christendom. Okay, and so one of their contributors wrote a book called Unchristian, and it's just about the young generation and what is their understanding of Christianity and why have many come to reject it, or at least why do they say they've come to reject it. And so there's some interesting observations in here, and it's very much like a kind of a scientific, data-oriented book where they just did a lot of research and surveyed people, and so it's kind of their findings, all right, is what that book includes. And so I'm going to quote that a little bit later, but for starters, I just want us to think about Christian culture, okay? Christian culture. So Jesus and His disciples on the scene, first century, right? And not long after Jesus dies, is resurrected, ascends to heaven. Then you've got the apostles and their ministry of spreading the gospel in the first century. And not long after, it's amazing if you read some of the extra biblical literature from those time periods, and there's not a whole lot, but there's some. And when you read it, you see that right away there were different ideas about God, different interpretations of even the letters of the apostles that were distorting the heart of God in terms of the gospel. Very much contributing to this growing culture that was almost unclear on the heart of God, if that makes sense. And then it just grows and grows. And for you, you've got, if you remember church history, some of you may have studied this a little bit, but you've got Constantine comes along and he establishes, Christianity went from being persecuted to being like the state religion, essentially. And then you've got that eventually develops into the Roman Empire. And then you have Christianity is dominant in the Roman Empire. Of course, it's Roman Catholic is the form of it that became dominant, but it was a Christian culture predominantly. Okay, so here we are in America in 2020, and as this book states, Christianity has left an enormous footprint on our culture. And so just think about how many manifestations there are of the Christian faith in our culture. And this is a limited smattering because we can't go into all of it, but we have churches, many churches throughout our country. In certain parts of our country, churches are everywhere, right? And you go to the South, where I spent some time in college, the Southeast, the churches are everywhere. They call it the Bible Belt down there. You've got areas, we were in my wife's home of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania recently on vacation, and you drive around that area and there are churches everywhere. Even up here in Washington, I remember when we moved here, we heard this is one of the least churched or least religious parts of our country, and yet there are churches all over the place in our county, everywhere, churches. And then there are Christian institutions, Christian schools, Christian colleges, parachurch ministries, all different ones, campus ministries, and FCA. I mean, there's countless different parachurch ministries. There are Christian radio stations. On the way in, we were listening to one of them. Okay, and they all have a similar feel. So there are books and blogs and seminars, and now with the internet, we have certain celebrity pastors who you can stream at any given moment, your favorite celebrity pastor. There are Christian restaurants. Chick-fil-A is opening in Lacey very soon, which some of us are very thankful for. I love that place. I'll be frequenting. Even Christian restaurants. Incidentally, I think In-N-Out, we were debating on the way in with In-N-Out in California. I think that's a Christian restaurant of sorts. Like there's Bible verses on the cups, right? Yeah. We have the best ones. Chick-fil-A, In-N-Out, what else do you need? But there is this Christian culture that just has a feel to it. I mean, Jill and I were talking on the way in as we're listening to one of the Christian stations. One of the little spokesmen on the station came on, and it's like, if you've ever jumped from one to another, they sound very similar. They have a similar feel. How would you describe the typical Christian radio show host? Any descriptors come to mind? How would you describe them? I mean, don't overthink it. I've got a whole bunch. I mean, you help me out here. I don't want to do all the talking. Bubbly, syrupy sweet, beaming with positivity, perky.
Not Ryan.
The opposite of Ryan Gear. But all this has a feel. And so there are differences. There's different denominations and different kind of sects and subgroups within Christendom. But there are also some commonalities. And when you think of all these institutions and these radio stations and the books and the blogs and all that just goes out there, this disseminated ideas and interpretations of Scripture and a worldview and a certain set of values. Let's just do this way, okay? What are some of the common values of all these different manifestations of Christianity? Can we just list some of the values of this group? What would be some of the values?
Law and order.
Okay, law and order. That's an interesting way to put it. Today, law and order. I mean, don't overthink it here, but what else? I mean, what are common values? I mean, the Bible, right? Obviously, I probably would kind of reverse those in order, but family values. Anything else? Equality. I'm going to put this one down. I don't know if this is a word, but I'm going to turn it into a word. Niceness. Just be nice. Right. I mean, some of these kind of are common, right, to the whole thing. Now, again, there's all sorts of little subgroups and differences and distinctives in other areas, but there's some commonalities about this large Christian culture. And for some of you've been immersed in that for seasons of your life. Others of you, not so much. I was immersed in it for 20 years. I mean, I'm 44 now, over 20 years. I mean, I became a Christian at the age of like 19, 20, and then went off to Christian college not long after that and was just immersed in the Christian world. Okay? And for some of you, you were immersed, and others of you maybe not immersed, but you're definitely familiar with what I'm talking about. And what I'm trying to communicate this morning is that, naturally speaking, because of our human tendency to be distracted, to have misunderstandings, to even mischaracterize God, now you turn that into you spread it out into a culture, and there can be a tendency to obscure or even distort how we understand the heart of God that becomes pervasive in this larger culture. Because the individual human tendency, when collectivized into a group, can become a mindset that's just sort of in the air, the spirit of the age sort of thing that just becomes dominant, that we just accept. We have these common values that are part of it, and it just becomes about those things. And we can lose sight of the heart and character of God. It can at times accurately reflect His character and aspects of it, but it can also lose sight of the heart of God, the true essence of God's character and what He's really like. And this parable, as Jesus tells it, He's telling it to a group of people that are really on both sides. He's got remember, we've said many times now, He's got the tax collectors and the sinners, and He's got the Pharisees and the scribes. And so you've got the people that identify more with the prodigal, the people that identify more with the prude, right? In His audience there. So let's do this. Let's unpack a little bit more what's going on with these two. And as I said, we're going to focus mainly on the older brother this morning. But let's just read the parable. Especially pay attention to the older brother as I read. And then you're going to help me make some observations about him. Okay? So we'll start in verse 11. I'll go ahead and read it. Just read along in your Bible and just make observations about the older brother in this parable. All right? So it says, and he said, that's Jesus. Jesus said, a man had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the estate that falls to me. So he divided his wealth between them. And not many days later, the younger son gathered everything together and went on a journey into a distant country, and there he squandered his estate with loose living. Now when he had spent everything, a severe famine occurred in that country, and he began to be impoverished. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine were eating, and no one was giving anything to him. That's where we spent our time last week. All right, let's keep going. But when he came to his senses, he said, How many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread, but I am dying here with hunger? I will get up, go to my father, and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired men. So he got up and came to his father, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion for him and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his slaves, Quickly, bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead, and he has come to life again. He was lost and has been found. And they began to celebrate. So just in summary here, let's take a pause for 1 second. In summary, what was the younger son after? I mean, what did he want?
Relief.
He wanted, what's that, Ryan?
Relief.
Okay, let's say back to the beginning of the story, at the very beginning. So when he left the home and he took the inheritance, what was he after?
The money.
The money, because he wanted to go out and have liberty to do whatever he wanted to please himself, and that's what he did, right? He squandered it. Okay, and then after he finds himself in the pigsty and he's poor, he's got nothing, it occurs to me, I can go back, at least I can go back and be a slave in my father's household. So then it's like he wants relief. So he goes back to his father's household, and the father it seems as though he's surprised how graciously the father welcomes him back when he gets back home and throws a party. Okay? All right, so that's the younger son, the prodigal son, and then the father's response to him. So now let's read the rest here. Verse 25 and following. Okay, here's the older son. Now his older son was in the field. And when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing, and he summoned one of the servants and began inquiring what these things could be. And he said to him, Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound. But he became angry and was not willing to go in. And his father came out and began pleading with him. But he answered and said to his father, Look, for so many years I have been serving you, and I have never neglected a command of yours. And yet you have never given me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours has come, who has devoured your wealth with prostitutes, you kill the fattened calf for him. And the father said to him, Son, you have always been with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, for this brother of yours was dead and has begun to live. He was lost, and he's been found. All right, so we talked about the prodigal and what he wanted. What was the Prude, the older brother? What was he... let's ask it this way. What was he experiencing in the household? What does this tell us he was experiencing in the household? And use the text right there. What was he? What does he say, and what does that tell us about what he was experiencing in the household?
So at the moment or prior?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Either. You want to go to prior?
From his viewpoint, he was doing everything right. Doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Always been a good son.
Doing everything right. I've been the good one.
Seems like there was
following the rules.
Some relational coldness there. I mean, from his perspective, because his dad never, I guess what he says is, you never do anything like this for me.
Yeah.
So there's even distance there, some distance even though they're in the same house.
Yeah, so let's talk more about this. So what does that say about his view of his father in that household?
Pretty much the same as the younger brother.
In what sense? How was it similar to that younger brother?
He had entitlement, yeah.
Entitlement?
He was a source of whatever, employment or funds.
They certainly weren't viewing their father as being generous, fair. They viewed it as a restricted environment. One bucking against it and saying, I'm out of here. And the other saying, okay, I'll play along with this, but I'm playing along with this only so that I get a certain outcome, right? But as we've been saying the last several weeks, we've studied this. Neither one of them really saw their father's heart with clarity and accuracy. They had misunderstandings of their father. They were really significant. And in the case of the older brother, it's manifest in a form of outrage. It's interesting to look at the text there, verse 29. After this he sees the party and the father's plea. It says the father's pleading with him. Hey man, just come and celebrate with me. Just come and be thankful that your brother was lost and now he's found. He was dead, now he's alive. And this is his answer, verse 29. Look! There it's emphatic. It's like, hey, think about this for a second with me. It's like, I think of Joe Biden keeps saying this, come on, man. He says this, come on, man. It's like, come on, man. What's for so many years I've been serving you, and I've never neglected a command of yours, and yet you have never given me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. I've slaved over this work here in the household. I've done my part. I've been the good son. Where's my party? Where's the generosity toward me?
I think fairness was really embedded in what he saw as right.
Yeah.
And even though this is a story, to think about, okay, what was it like before the prodigal said, I'm out of here? He probably didn't pull his weight, didn't work as hard, laid in bed at night going, how can I get my inheritance? I've got to get out of here. This is just not going to cut it.
Yeah. It's easy to imagine that, right?
Yeah.
That would make perfect sense. And there's fairness, and we had a little squabble in our house between our girls this morning. And that fairness piece, whether it explicitly comes up or not, it's always in play, right? It's not fair. And each one of them in their little three minds, or for any of us, really, we have a certain version of what would be fair. And this is not fair. So yeah, absolutely, you can imagine that playing into it. So we've said, look, they misunderstood the character of their father, and they had their own desires, right? Both of them had desires, and it looked different on the outside somewhat, but they really were driven by their desires. And so let's dig into that a bit, just humanly. So now, aside from the parable itself, we just know biblically there are certain things that humans, ever since the beginning, that we've been after in this world. And some of that's appropriate, but then like everything we talk about, there's this mix of both an appropriate and then an inappropriate, or a legitimate, but then also an inordinate desire, right? So there's a mix, but generally there's different ways to break it down, and this isn't perfect, but just you can break it down this way, okay? We're after security, Go ahead.
One thing before you
Yep.
go on, it's like I'm seeing the definite like distrust in the judgment of the father. Like I'm wondering if the older son would be thinking like outcome based. It's like, hey, this isn't even going to help my brother. You know, it's like, this is not smart. This is not how you help someone reform and change. Whereas like the father is entitled to just love without it, just because he loves.
Yeah.
I would be struggling with like this is stupid. This isn't going to help him.
Yeah, like this is a dumb approach.
Yeah.
Yeah. To totally relate to that.
There should be consequences.
It needs consequences. And, I mean, there were consequences. But what the older brother's envisioning is, hey, dad should be punishing this kid. Those specific type of consequences. I mean, he could, I'm sure, outline for the father, here's what you should do. Do this and this and this. Make him suffer. Make him grovel a bit for his betrayal, right?
Well, so, and I just looked where the father said, and all that is mine is yours. And the prude could be going, well, yeah, because you already gave him his. So, no surprise there.
Absolutely resented that. And he knew that, culturally speaking, it was a tremendous insult to demand the inheritance of the father. It's like you're explicitly saying, I want the money, I don't care about you. I want the money. And so from the older brother's self-righteous perspective, oh my gosh, I mean, this guy is guilty of the worst betrayal and insult imaginable. He's a scum of the earth.
Older brother says, at least I'm waiting quietly for you to die.
Right, yeah, right.
And by the way, he kind of, it's not just that the older brother thought he was the scum of the earth, he was the scum of the earth.
Yeah. I mean, it's like literally plays out in the way he's in the mud pit with the pigs, right? So, okay. So, in terms of human desire, there are things that everybody in this world wants, okay? So different, I like alliteration. So different alliterated versions. You know what alliteration is? It's like when each heading begins with the same letter, right? So security, satisfaction, significance would be one way of putting it. Everyone's after like security, like protecting myself and kind of making sure everything's okay in my little world. Satisfaction, which has to do with like pleasing myself and what I'm experiencing. And significance has to do with like proving myself. Okay? Making a name for myself or having some sense of importance to my life or value to my life. And as I said earlier, I want to be really clear on this. I'm not saying that's all wrong. It's just human. We have these desires. We do. And there's a line somewhere that we don't ever know, but there's this mix of both legitimate and illegitimate or healthy and unhealthy versions of that. So now let's dig into this. How does we'll put it on the heading, the prodigal here, but like, how does the world offer us fulfillment of those desires? Security, satisfaction, significance. Okay, I mean, you don't have to go into a ton of detail here, just kind of like, I mean, what are our endeavors in the world totally apart from God, without religion of any kind, but just what does this sort of tend to look like? I don't know, think just American cultural life. Like, what do people chase? What are we after? Secure, I mean...
Health, wealth, happiness.
Health, wealth, happiness, good education, I want my family to be safe or whatever, or I don't know. I think safety in terms of security, meaningful job. I'm not going to put them in the categories, but you get the idea, right?
Or no job.
Control.
I mean, the pleasure one's obvious. We're kind of a hedonistic culture, like all the pleasures of like partying and all that stuff that can afford you, and just a reckless, hey, just go out there and have fun. That mentality, which we all probably have had our seasons of life with that, and I think it's said all along, like we can still identify with this in parts, but kind of what tends to happen, I know from my experience, plunging into the Christian world that I described from my late teens, early 20s on. Like, it was like kind of like, hey, you know what, I wasn't pursuing these things in the same way in the world, and now I'm like, there's another way of living. And so now here's my question. How does the church, I'm going to erase this, but for now, how does the church hold out the offer of security, satisfaction, and significance?
Progressive sanctification, continued growth and maturity.
Okay. Continued growth and maturity offers us, really in some ways, each of these you could say it's related to. If I can just become more like Christ, then I'll be more content in life. I will have significance, and then my Christ likeness becomes my significance, because now I matter. I have purpose in this world. Is it true or false? One of the attractive things about Christianity and even church and getting involved in a church culture and a Christian school and a Christian God is like safety. Like, it's going to be okay here. Like, this is an environment where there's love and niceness and security of a form, and it's separate from the world, and so those influences aren't as strong. And true or false?
False. Oh, true.
Well, there's structure.
Structure.
There's routine.
Routine.
There's social proof. People are telling you you're doing great. So you get feedback.
Good feedback, so you can kind of climb and feel like, okay, yeah, I'm getting somewhere.
But just to piggyback off of that, there's a well-defined progression.
There's a well-defined progression. It's like there are these measurable objectives in a way, and we just work our way towards these, right? And then everything we said of the Christian culture earlier in terms of those common values of, okay, so now I'm learning my Bible, and now I'm developing a prayer life, and now I've got certain commitments in my family, and now I'm going to do things a certain way that are very different from the way I would have done them over here. And it becomes a different kind of culture than the world's culture, than the secular culture. But here's my question. What can be the same about it? Even though the outside looks different, what can be the same about it? What might be the same?
Well, the outcome can be. And I say that to say, you've said many times that a lot of your counseling interaction is, hey, I did all these things. I was plugged into this progression that should have made me more secure and satisfied and significant. And then to throw my own saying in, and it worked until it
didn't.
Yeah. And at this point, shipwreck is just a soft gale away. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And they know it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what led to it, was the missing God's character. I don't have to get God's character necessarily to check all those boxes.
Yeah.
I can be checking them for my own.
Yeah.
And they all become those things that you do in church are just it's the same thing. You're finding your significance, your security, and your satisfaction in those, a position, a title, an activity.
And do you think that's obvious or not obvious to us as that's happening?
When you're in it, it's not until it all falls apart on you that it becomes obvious. Because when you're doing it, you think you're doing the right thing. That's why you're doing it.
Right. And it seems to be working to a degree.
And like Greg says, until it doesn't, and then you're like, oh.
And there's a lot of reasons that wheels can wobble
Mm-hmm.
as we go down that path. And you can rationalize why that wheel is wobbling. Well, it's not really you, it's the circumstances, it's outside forces, it's wrong political, leaders, and then the wheel falls off, and you suddenly go, oh, that was my wheel that fell.
Sometimes in the church, your focus is still on man, and ultimately, the first will be last, and you can gather treasures on earth or you can gather treasures in heaven. So ultimately, the Prude, the church, would need to focus on God over man.
Right. And so what we're saying is, like, in the world, it's obvious. Like the story we said, the prodigal, he's the obvious rebel. Like life's a mess. He's a party animal. He'd be the drug addict party animal who just throws everything away, and he ends up in the gutter. Like, he's that guy, right? It's very obvious that he wasn't living for his father, that he was living just for himself, his almost selfish indulgence. It's very obvious. It's not at all obvious that the older brother is the same, because he is intact. Everything is together. And what we're saying is that that human part of us that's going to be with us till the other side is going to be drawn toward pursuing these things. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm not saying that's all wrong. We all want to secure ourselves and our kids, and we have things we do to try to ensure that, and that's good. And we also have a way of, like, putting all our stock in that and saying, as like the older brother says here, hey, I didn't neglect the command of yours. Everything you told me to do, I did. I did it all right. Where's my good stuff? Where's the outcome I wanted in this world? Where is that? I spend almost all week, every week, meeting with believers whose lives are like, that's where they're at. This is my counseling ministry. Hey, I did this right. I tried to do that right. I tried to do marriage. I tried to do a kids. And here we are with our mess. I did everything right, God. How the heck did we get here? And God says, yeah, what was the objective? What was the goal? Humanly, our goal is still, it's like, whether the heart goes this route or this route, it's still a heart that is trying to rescue itself, satisfy itself, secure itself, invest itself with significance. And all the while, there's a God of grace over the whole thing, who says, hey, you've got me. I'm with you. And all that is mine is yours. And we've been seeing, it's a miracle. But like in Ephesians, everything we're looking at in chapter 1, where he just dumps out the blessings, where he says, every spiritual blessing is yours in Christ. You've been chosen, adopted, forgiven. You've got a family of love. You're blameless in God's sight. He's everything you need. He's revealed to you. He's going to secure you. Your eternity is secure. And you know that you are inseparably bound to your Creator God. He is with you. In fact, remember when what's the Father say? Hey, you should celebrate, to the older brother. You should celebrate because your brother was what? And now he's what? He was what? He was dead and now he's alive. He was lost and now he's found. Was he really dead? If he was dead, he wouldn't have been able to walk home. So what does he mean he was dead? Spiritually dead. And what's the definition of spiritual death? Separation from the Father. Is the older brother manifesting spiritual life in this? He's not with his father, right? He's with him, like, geographically, but he's not with him.
So 28 says, and his father came out to the older brother.
Pursuing him, too.
Yeah.
And we've said since the garden, that's what God's been in pursuit of us. From the garden on. And he's in pursuit of us when we're stuck in this mindset, and he's in pursuit of us when we're stuck in this mindset. And sometimes he uses it worked until it didn't thing to help us see him when we're here. And I think that Christendom, by and large, in my 20 plus years of experience, at least I can say for me, definitely as things began falling apart in certain ways in my life, I was realizing, oh yeah, I want what I want. And my Christianity was largely about trying to get what I want. And I abandoned this fantasy and embraced this fantasy. And neither one was really about my relationship with my Father. And so then what happens is, as he pursues them in this parable, he pursues us in our lives, and he reveals himself to us as a loving, gracious Father. And look, it takes some serious deprogramming and reprogramming in our heads and hearts for that to sink in, because we are by nature bent in such a way that we just don't see that. We don't believe that. That's why this guy left in the first place. This place is for the birds, man. You can't have any fun around here. This is like restrictive and binding. And I had to go out and free and just have some fun and be under my own authority, because then I'll be able to be free and have some pleasure in my life. which means that guy's not trustworthy. I can do it better myself. And so he goes out, he learns the hard way, and realizes when he comes home, he's not even expecting the welcome that he gets, because he still doesn't see how gracious his father is. And then this overwhelming sense of love comes at him from his father, and he breaks. He says, wow, I've sinned against you. I've sinned and don't deserve, I'm not worthy to be a son in your household. I mean, there's this clarity. Wow, I am being loved with undeserved love. So he starts to see it, right? And as we don't see, there's no more to the story. We don't get to see what happens with the Prude, but as he sort of represents the Pharisees of that day, I mean, what did they do to Jesus? I mean, they killed him. And where this is seen is it's seen in the attitude when he says, look, I have served, I mean, I've thought it, said it, heard it, a lot of times implicitly, but it's like, I did my part. So it's seen in that attitude toward the Father when things don't go our way, and it's seen in our attitude toward other people. So here now, let me just read this interesting little observation from their surveys and their findings. They surveyed a bunch of outsiders, so non-Christians, or people who grew up in the church and abandoned the church, to see, what is your perception of Christianity? And this is some of the findings. The primary reason outsiders feel hostile toward Christians, and especially conservative ones, is not because of any specific theological perspective. What they react negatively to is our swagger, how we go about things, and the sense of self-importance we project. Outsiders say that Christians possess bark and bite. Christians may not normally operate in attack mode, but when it happens, frequently enough that others have learned to watch their step around us. Outsiders feel they can't let Christians walk all over them, so they have to stand up to them. So they observe Christians to be a militarized group that's just wanting what they want. One outsider put it this way: most people I meet assume that Christian means very conservative, entrenched in their thinking, anti-gay, anti-choice, angry, violent, illogical, empire builders. They want to convert everyone, and they generally cannot live peacefully with anyone who doesn't believe what they believe. The three most common perceptions of present-day Christianity are: 1, anti-homosexual; 2, judgmental; 3, hypocritical. You can go on and on. I mean, this is a Christian researcher saying, hey, what's being said about us out there in the culture? Now, people come to their own conclusions for a variety of reasons. We all have a rebellious heart. So the people who fill out the surveys and say these negative things about Christians, they've got all sorts of perverted motives and everything else for saying that, okay? But the New Testament does say, hey, there is something to how the outsiders view you. And it does say something about where we're really at and what we really want. And what the hope of the world is the revelation of the heart of God, who He really is. That's my hope. That's your hope. That's the hope of the world. Is God, not us, not cultural Christianity. Who God is, who He really is, and His love for sinners of every flavor, every kind, the obvious kind, the not so obvious kind. The ones whose lives are completely falling apart and it's obvious. The ones whose lives look upright and put together. His grace is the point. And what He's doing in redemption is He's bringing people back in this relationship. I mean, the marriage supper, this view of, or this imagery of Revelation is this imagery of like a party where when we're finally home and we all have this big celebration with God, and it is a celebration that is all this it is this party that represents the outpouring of grace, the welcoming home of God's people. So remember I said earlier, you've got the Ephesians 1 truths, every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places. You know what the challenging part of that is? Every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places is ours in Christ Jesus. So here are the two challenging words there. 1, spiritual. Because even in this endeavor, we still try to make in this world our treasure, right? But He's saying it's spiritual. It's unseen. It's a miracle when you can see it and experience it. and it's in the heavenly places. In this world, you will have what? And so often, doesn't this become about just managing my life to avoid what?
I thought the two words you were going to say were, yeah, but.
Because that's what we often say, right? Whether we say it or we just think it or we just feel it. And so what we have is we don't have any guarantees. I mean, I'd love to think there are guarantees about how things are going to turn out in our country, in our world. I don't want to be afraid for my kids' lives. Even if I want to make myself really nervous and like just terrified, I start thinking about like grandkids. Then I'm like, oh, forget, I can't even handle it. Like, right? I don't want to, but I don't get the guarantee. I heard a commentator recently saying, well, I just have this, God told me He's going to do this and do that and protect America and blah. I'm like, I'd be real careful saying that.
Can I get on the distribution list?
Yeah. I didn't get the memo. That's funny. God told me the opposite. Yeah. So again, it's like, God has said, look, the world is fallen and broken, and you're not going to go unscathed. And even if you go to church and line your kids up in the pew, still you're not going to. Their hearts are all destructive. And you're going to deal with destruction. You're going to deal with sin and its consequences because you live in the world, the fallen world. And I'm with you. And I'm for you. And I'm going to redeem the situation. And in the end, you're going to be able to look back and see this amazing story of redemption play out in your life. And it's going to magnify my heart, my love for you, my commitment to you as my kid. I was with you the whole way. And we're going to, on the other side, we will see Him for who He is, without the human, fleshly distractions and perversions and distortions. We're going to see Him clearly, finally, and it's all going to be okay. And for the time being, we walk one step at a time with this assurance that our Father is for us, and He's in pursuit of us. He's pursuing us through a variety of aspects and situations and circumstances in our lives, through relationships in our lives, in places we feel stuck, in relationships in which we feel stuck. He is pursuing to show His heart, who He is, what He's like. All right, thoughts, questions? I had this one other thing, but thoughts or questions, and I don't need to say this week. We might come back around to it.
I've been thinking about when I was a kid. So I don't really think I came to know the Lord about 8 or 9, but around 17, 18, 19, like you, start really considering, so Jeff and I are from the same neighborhood.
Literally, a couple streets over.
Around the block.
In Rhode Island, far from here.
Right. Yeah. And all I could think at that point was, I got to get out of Rhode Island. I got to get away from these prodigals because I need to grow, So then I go to Bob Jones, the most holy place on the planet, because I'm going to go and find the security satisfaction.
And you found Ryan.
I mean, I like to think in my heart, I love Jesus, and I go to the land where they're supposed to love Jesus, and I find the angriest person on the planet, and I marry him.
You marry that guy.
No, but seriously, I'm like, what's wrong? Everybody knows the system. They all look really good. And then I'm in the dorms and getting to know people and date people. And I'm like, they don't have the answer. Where is this? Where's the missing link? I was so confused because I came from and was the prodigal. And now I'm trying in the world of the Prudes to do that. And there's just I was so lost and so confused. So now I'm the prodigal, loving Jesus, living in the Prude world, and it's a weird clash because you can't love Pink Floyd and Jesus at the same time.
Your CDs would get confiscated.
Oh, they were. Yeah. They didn't even. Yeah.
didn't even make it to the trip down, right? You were smart enough to leave him at home.
Yes.
Look, there is.
It was tapes though.
It was assets, Jeff, we're
It
over.
was way back then. Look, there's something to that, and I mean, there's a mindset. Let's see if I can get this in. There's a mindset too of that safety and supposed security of the Christian world that is just a farce. It's just it's a superficial. Looks to be something, and there's not substance there. There's you know the old Tangled movie, the Disney movie Tangled. Have you guys seen that? So our daughters wanted to watch that recently, and it's been a long time since we've seen it. So we just pulled it up and watched it on whatever Hulu or one of those. So we watched it, and do you remember the storyline of so Rapunzel is living with her evil stepmother, basically, but thinks this lady's really her mom, but she's not, because she stole Rapunzel as a little baby. And why did she steal Rapunzel? She stole her because she knew Rapunzel had this special power. Rapunzel was born with this special power to grant health and healing and youth and things like that. And so the mean, as my daughters call the bad lady, stole the baby Rapunzel, brings her to her tower, and then keeps her there and doesn't ever let her leave. And she keeps her there because that's her way of keeping herself young. She's basically using Rapunzel to keep her life intact. And it says this, as she's trying to convince Rapunzel, who's now like a teenager, I think she's 18, and she wants to leave and explore the world, to convince her that you can't go and you ought not go, these are the things she says. The world is a dangerous place filled with horrible, selfish people. You must stay here where it's safe. You want to go outside, but I keep you in this tower to keep you safe and sound. And there's this song she sings. Mother knows best. It's a scary world out there. Ruffians, thugs, poison ivy, quicksand, cannibals, snakes, the plague. Mother's right here. Mother will protect you. I love you. And then at one point, the daughter's like questioning that. She's like and she starts to break away. And the mother yells in anger and fury, "You are not leaving this tower, ever!" Was there real security in that tower? Was there real love in that tower? It's a controlled, manipulated environment that's still, the thrust is still selfishness. What a contrast. When you think of the heart of the Father. Gracious, kind, liberating. But so much of this culture, in my experience, has reflected that sort of thing. Even some of my tendencies to want to protect my kids, well, I think they're justifiable and they seem healthy. In some ways, they're not healthy. I remember Jill saying one day, people said, "Well, how could you ever send your girls to public school?" Because with our oldest daughter, we had started with public school at that time, and this certain person who was very opinionated said, basically, who's going to protect them from the evil world out there? And Jill said, who's going to protect them from me? Interesting thought. Because there's this evil in every one of our hearts, isn't there? And what we need in terms of like the real protection and security, like that's God's business. And so whatever endeavor, whether it's schooling or anything else, like whatever endeavor we go through, God's saying, go with open eyes. Know what the human condition is. Know in this world you will have trouble. Out of the heart of each individual, even my cute little kids, is going to come all sorts of evil. And what you need is to know me. And that I'm with you. And I give wisdom. And I give my grace and redemption and encouragement. So go with eyes wide open. And I hope that God can help us kind of see through all these different delusions and deceptions that entice us so that we can see who God really is. See the Father, the heart of the Father, right? All right, let's pray. Father, thank you for this time, this study of Luke 15. So many things here and different rabbit trails we can go down. But thank you most of all for revealing your heart to us. You're a God who seeks and saves the lost, that you care about us, that you love us, that you've provided what we need, a Savior, a substitute, a deliverer. to give us the greatest form of security in relationship with you. Help us to trust you in the day-to-day. Help us to see your hand in our lives, all the good manifestations of your kindness to us that we experience daily, our daily provisions, daily bread. Help us to see. Most importantly, help us to appreciate the salvation you have in Christ. In His name, amen.